Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Two Trees podcast. I'm John Dillon. I am not the official host, introductor of Season 3. That's Martin, but he's at work, and I have snuck in through his back door to his garage so that I can record a special edition of the Two Trees podcast for you. It's always a lot of fun to run a podcast. It's more fun than I ever thought that it would be. So if you're out there wondering if you should start a podcast, I promise you it will be equal parts frustrating and really fun. The hard part is pushing the buttons and making all the technology work. The fun part is getting to talk about cool stuff and meeting great people. And I have two awesome people on the phone with you today, and they're both from California, the land of far away. And so I have my good friend Anthony Delgado is back with us. He has written a fantastic book called The Gospel is Bigger Than You Think, bigger than just personal salvation. It's about the kingship of Jesus, the story of creation and new creation and the mission of God's people. And if you don't own this book, you need to own this book. It's good, good, good. And the cover looks cool. So you'll not only look cool, you'll be cool. And so, Anthony, welcome to the Two Trees.
Thanks, John, for having me. It's a joy to be able to come and share with your audience again and just have some good time of fellowship with yourself.
No, it's good to be here. It's always fun to have you on here. You're a fun guest to have around. Are you writing anything secretly right now that we need to be aware of? What is next on the list of random homework assignments that you're working on?
Wow, I'm working on at
secrets.
least.
Yes, the secrets.
The secrets. Yeah. I'm trying not to share too much. I am writing a book. I'll tell you the slow project that's not going to come out anytime soon. The slow project is a book on the devil in the darkness. And it's taken a couple of different forms already. At one point, it was going to be a biography of the devil, and that's still a possibility that then would come with like appendices and stuff and how to think about different parts of the story of the devil throughout the scriptures, and probably, if you know me, throughout the Second Temple literature also, and try to parse those things appropriately. The book I'm more interested in, I'm always writing 5 or 6 different things, to be honest with you, but where I've got my hands a little bit deeper in is a book on Protestant sacramentalism. There's a few books written out there, but I think where my niche is always to be looking more broadly into saying, not here's my take on sacramentalism within Protestantism, but here's my take on sacramentalism broadly from a historic church perspective, and obviously from a biblical theology perspective, and how that plays out in any church setting, not just in a single church setting. So looking more broadly than narrowly, I guess you could say. That's a hard word to say, narrowly.
It is a hard word to say.
But yeah, so that's probably going to be the next book that I release. I had hopes at one point in time of releasing it this summer, but I doubt that's going to happen at this point. So,
well, I'll be looking forward to it. I'm not surprised that appeals to you. You have that love of art and beauty, and so sacramentalism and the way that we approach the Lord through those kinds of things. That sounds really fascinating, and I will buy a copy of that one too. But your book that really has been making the rounds at the moment, The Gospel is Bigger Than You Think, really resonated with me because at the time that you released it, I was preparing to make the shift from the Old Testament into the Gospels. And I was getting really frustrated with, I'm going to call it pop Christianity, just the way that they used the word gospel to pretty much mean thing that we're doing at church, and they kind of stripped it of the meaning that you find in Scripture, and a lot of the expressions back to the idea of kingdom and the lordship of Christ and the beauty of the Lord. And so I really resonated with your book, and I know lots of other Christians did as well. In particular, there's a excuse me, there's a gentleman from our Two Trees podcast community, a man called Kaleb. Amos, Kaleb, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, John.
Hey, brother, it's great to have you here because you engaged with Pastor Anthony online a little bit. You wrote a review of his book. Now, I know your love is music. What made you pick up your typewriter and launch into the world of book reviews?
Sure. So just a tiny bit about me. I'm a youth and worship pastor out in California, and also a writer, and I've been writing for a long time. Real passionate about serving the Lord with music and also with writing. And I view what I do vocationally as working in the local church to facilitate sacred moments between people and their Creator. And so I've used some of my creative gifts to do that over the years. Been blessed to be a part of a lot of great teams doing different projects, from recording to writing, and had a season of life where I wasn't writing as much, and a little over a year ago felt God kind of nudge me the way that he often does with so many of us, to kind of pick up the pen again, and started writing. I write a Substack called Highways to Zion, and recently thought, it'd be cool to start doing some book reviews. I'm a book nerd, as I believe all of us are. I'm here in my office, and I've got probably about 3 years worth of book stacks behind me that I'm not going to get to anytime soon. And I thought, man, it'd be cool to just start talking about what I'm learning and loving and enjoying in some of the stuff I'm reading. And the first book on deck was Anthony's book, The Gospel is Bigger Than You Think. And really, really enjoyed it, and wanted to, kind of put down what I gleaned from it as someone who, John, like you, and Anthony, like you, I'm working in a ministry context, and trying to transmit the gospel, for myself to younger generations, which is really important to me. And I just really loved and appreciated, Anthony, the way that you broke through some of the cultural fog, the cultural milieu, and got to really just the bare bones of what the gospel really is. And that really resonated with me. And so I wrote a review, and it's been fun to kind of see the fruit of that.
Well, I think your love of writing definitely showed up in your review. I can tell that wasn't your first time trying to put your thoughts down on paper. It was written beautifully, and I loved the overall tone. It didn't come across like, hey, I know everything there is to know, and I'm going to tell you why Anthony's book doesn't do what I want it to do. There was a real sense in which you were engaged in the conversation, that you understood part of writing books and of podcasting in a lesser way is to facilitate conversation. It's to talk. It's to engage with another mind. And I loved that you didn't just talk about, hey, I liked this about the book. This is what he says, kind of the Amazon summary of the book. I think you did that part well, but that wasn't really the heart of your book. It also was, these are the thoughts that it made me have. And so I was able to, go back through my mind of what Anthony had taught me. And then also to see, like I was sitting down at a table, and I visualized it would be cool to have Anthony and Kaleb at the table with me, and we could just talk about this. And I have a microphone and a soundboard. So I was like, I'm just going to do this online. Unless you guys want to move to Ohio, and then we can go out for food. But what I would love to do is just to have the two of you guys kind of talk. I don't really want you to throw rocks at each other or anything like that. Anthony and Kaleb are good friends, okay? They're at peace with one another. They be brethren. So if you're worried about, this guy's going to come after Anthony, that's not the case. Kaleb liked the book. He just has some questions and some thoughts that came up as he was reading the book. And I thought, it's probably not just Kaleb that has those thoughts, or would like to hear from the mind of the author. Let's have these guys together. And so that's what we're doing. And so, Kaleb, you said there are a couple of minor qualms, a couple of provisos that you are interested in. And so I would love for you to engage with my friend Anthony. And I'm going to sit back and drink coffee and judge you silently both from a distance.
Sure. Thank you for that. No pressure, John. You're the best.
You guys all heard
off,
that. I am the best. Tell Rose and tell Martin that it is me.
That's why you're the host,
absolutely.
Dude.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I think first off, what I want to say is just really echo Anthony. I think you captured something. Well, you captured a lot of things I'm passionate about in this book. One thing that you did, I think, a phenomenal job of is kind of unveiling just the massive scope of the story of God. And I think that in a way is kind of what necessitated your reason for writing the book, right? Is that too many of us have a small-minded gospel. And just this concept of the gospel being bigger than we tend to think, I feel like really hits home for us as, as Western Christians living in the society that we live. And, I think helping people be inspired with just the epic nature of the narrative of God and of the scriptures. It's something I tell my students often: if you think the Bible is boring, you're boring. Okay. So I think it's so important to just inspire that wonder of the Word of God. Just one little anecdote from my ministry. About like a year and a half ago, I took my students on Sunday mornings through 1st and 2nd Samuel, and we took probably like a year going through it on Sunday mornings. And it was so cool to just see like their eyes light up with things that they had no idea were there in the text, because no one ever took the time really to lead them through it. And it was just so fun to see young people, these young generations, exposed to just the powerful, dynamic, epic nature of the story of God. And I think you do a great job of that in the book. And
thank you.
One thing especially I thought that was really profound was the whole idea early on. You talk about the gospel of Middle America, and you use the phrase that it's kind of like our folk religion here in the West. Do you remember some of that? Could you maybe briefly, for someone who hasn't read the book, like just kind of mention what you meant by that?
Yeah, when I talk about folk religion, is somewhat of a technical term that refers to what the people happen to believe versus the official doctrine of the church. And so, I sort of use the example of the Appalachian magic that gets mixed with the Dutch Reformed tradition.
Hang on.
When you're out in the Appalachians.
You have to stop. They are called the Appalachian Mountains. That is Appalachian.
Oh no, I forgot that I was going to say.
I will have
been pause the podcast, everyone.
There will be no misinformation on this show. Please carry on.
The Appalachian. I probably didn't even say that right still.
That's close enough. I'm going to give you points.
Yeah, and you can see like a big difference between, Dutch Reformed theology and, what the church officially believes, and sort of what's, a lot of this, spiritual nuance that's being played out in sort of you could say the real world, and as people are living their day-to-day lives. And that's what I think we have in the West, is that we have, especially, I should say in the United States, really, this isn't true for all of the Western world, but there's a general sense of, I'm a Christian because I live in the United States. Depending on what research poll you pull up today, anywhere from 70 to 80% of people are still polling saying they're a Christian of some kind. And yet, for a lot of those people, they're never stepping foot in a church or anything else. And so they have sort of a general sense of, I believe Jesus died for my sins, and I believe I'm a sinner, and I believe I'm going to heaven when I die. But they don't really know much more than that. And that's what I mean by folk religion, is that where all of those statements are true, at least in a sense or in a form, they're just a really far cry from the fullness of what the scriptures teach. And so yeah, so that's what I mean when I say, folk religion or the gospel of Middle America. And I'm using Middle America less technically there, just to say the gospel of Middle America just sort of means, in America, what do people happen to believe? And Middle America, it's kind of a marketing term that, it's a way of referring to the general consensus of the people in the United States, which is impossible in the United States to do that, but it's sort of just a way of trying to target people in the United States. And so that's just where I think we're at.
Yeah. No, I thought that was so powerful. And the word, when I read that in your book, that really first came to me was the word syncretism, and how in the scriptures, especially in the Old Testament, that was one of the main problems Yahweh has with his people, is just this syncretism where they're worshiping all these other gods. They think, hey, I can have this, that, and the other too. Where Yahweh, man, in the Ten Commandments, we're the first to, man, you serve no one else but me alone. And I think that you clued in on something that's really important in our time, which is just that danger of syncretism, just of Jesus plus other stuff. And man, that really spoke to me. I thought that was awesome.
That's awesome. I actually think that there's even another level you can take that, and I forget if this shows up in the book and where it would, but if you're thinking about like when Yahweh says, "Have no other gods before me," part of that isn't just don't have them above me. I mean, that's part of it, but it also makes me think of the way that like when Rome began their conquest of the I guess the world, you could say, and they start to go, Greek is Zeus, Romans Jupiter, same thing, right? And we actually get hints that same type of syncretism was happening in the Old Testament, that there's a sense in which as the Jewish people or the Israelites began to interact with the Canaanites, that there was a temptation to say, Baal, Yahweh, aren't we really talking about the same thing here? And so there's a certain degree to which that appears to be happening, and that seems to be kind of okay with the pagan nations. Mm-hmm. But not within the Torah, not within the law of God. So we do need to be very careful about that kind of syncretism, because it's obviously, I don't need to say anything else, but rampant today to say, Judaism, or, Islam, or even, whatever other religious idea, it's all the same thing. We're all looking at the same God.
Right. No, I thought that was really, really profound. You did a great job with that. Loved it. So I just have a couple of, John mentioned the word qualms, which I won't try to spell right now, but just a couple of things in the book that I just have more questions about. So John, if that's okay, I'd just like to ask Anthony just a couple.
Yeah, brother, roll
couple
along.
More questions. Totally. So Anthony, there are a couple of moments in the book where, I don't know about you guys, I'm an information nerd. When I get like a book, I don't like endnotes. I like footnotes. Like, put it all right there. Let me see it right in front of my face. I don't want to be flipping back and forth. So there were a couple moments in the book, which was so good. There were a couple moments where I was just wanting just more info. And one, I think, because I was actually thinking about some people I know that are maybe unfamiliar with some of these ideas, like John here on the Two Trees. You guys do a great job of, unpacking the uncanny and the strange and the weird corners of the Bible. But on page 62, Anthony, your chapter on the kingdom gospel, you mention the sons of God, which a lot of the listeners here on the podcast would be familiar with. And you mention the sons of God appointed by God as judges after the division of the nations at Babel in Deuteronomy 32, verse 8. But I was thinking about friends of mine, people I know, and realizing there's some people that might read that and then go and look in their Bible and wonder, man, why does my version not say that? It doesn't indicate the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. It may have like NASB or some other translations have sons of Israel there. What would you say to someone who is reading that in your book, but they're unfamiliar with a divine council, Deuteronomy 32 worldview, and they're kind of new to that framework?
Man, Kaleb, that question gets at the heart of so many conversations that I had with my editors. Because on one hand, I wanted this book to be the kind of thing that you could, if you were a good reader, just read over a weekend. And I think that is largely what we produced, although there are some of these spots where some of the, you might say, just some of the higher level thinking kind of got left in. And then there are spots like what you pointed out where maybe I needed more, that I assumed knowledge that wasn't there. And so you're absolutely, this is a really fair criticism, and it just is a reflection of the type of things that we were really trying to work through to make this, like, I wanted somebody to be able to read this. I didn't want it being a 6-month read where they would get to the end of the 6 months and not be able to sort of envision the thrust of the whole book. And so it just was constantly a time of leaving things out, adding things in. And this is one that, honestly, it really hasn't come up. I get asked this question constantly. I was even on the Biblical Reenchantment podcast just 1 or 2 episodes ago. My co-host asked me. He goes, "Hey, I was trying to talk to somebody about Psalm 82 or Deuteronomy 32, and we went there, and there said sons of Israel, and it's like, what do I do with that?" And he just blindsides me with this question on the podcast, which is great. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. It should be in there. I do think that anybody who has that question, if they Google it, they're going to get a decent explanation right there in that AI generated Google snippet at the top. But it is a profound question. And I think the big thing that I would point people to is just this reality that there's different text traditions. And you can probably already anticipate now why this got left out, because when we're trying, it wasn't really in the scope of the book for me to like try to evaluate all the text traditions and argue for a single text tradition. So I instead assumed my perspective. But perhaps a note about this would have been helpful. But yeah, I believe that the most original is Sons of God. Mm-hmm. And I believe that partly from, looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls material and other Second Temple literature that we've had for, much longer than the Dead Sea Scrolls. But one of the things that I definitely see is a pattern in the Second Temple literature, most notably parts of the New Testament. Let's say, for example, Jude, that quotes First Enoch, Jubilees, the set of fragments and scrolls we call the Book of Giants from the Second Temple, and a handful of other places where we do see a supernatural interpretation of Deuteronomy 32, Psalm 82. I also find it interesting that there are places that Deuteronomy 32 points to within the biblical canon, if we read it as sons of God, that they don't point to if we interpret it sons of Israel. So you start to get a shifting in the narrative. And so I think that we get a more consistent look at the Old Testament. But if we figure that the Second Temple Jews were, at least largely, or many of them, thinking of the Deuteronomy 32 sons of God as angelic beings, and we assume a supernatural interpretation, then we see that reflected in the New Testament. And then we see that acknowledged by the apostolic fathers. We don't really get much pushback until Augustine in the 4th century. So I think when we see that patterning, that points us to that reality. And so it's really that Old Testament to New Testament to the apostolic fathers that is important to me. Sorry, John.
No, I just wanted to jump in here and, excuse me, say why I was glad you didn't jump into the weeds in that area. look, I'm as interested in giants and Nephilim and the weird corners of the Bible as anyone you're going to meet. But I also know that our movement, if you want to call it that, people who are interested in the giants, in Deuteronomy 32, Psalm 89, Psalm 82, that are looking at these passages, we get the criticism that that's all we want to talk about. And I loved that you came with this understanding as your background. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think we need books about this controversy, about like the unseen realm was revolutionary for me. We need those books. Yeah. But we also need books on other topics written by people who already know this content, so that we're not just in an echo chamber talking amongst ourselves, especially as a podcaster. This is hard because podcast land is filled with niche interests, and people only want you to talk about like this one particular thing. And so I loved that you were able to take that idea. Like when I first read it, like Kaleb is saying, I was like, oh man, a footnote would be cool here. But when I was reading it in the moment, it didn't even cross my mind. I followed what you were doing. And I think that's a powerful statement. Not to say, okay, I feel the need to justify each one of my thoughts, but to say, at this point, Dr. Heiser has written, lots of other people have written, John Walton has written, that there is, loads of information about this, and to not feel the urge to defend it at every step, but to just say, okay, this is truth. If you want to know more about that, go ahead and study that. I don't think, and I say this not for your book, but for the people who are out there who are creating their own content. Don't feel like you have to defend this in every conversation that you have. It's important, and I got this from C.S. Lewis. He said, we need maybe not fewer books on Christianity, but we need books on other topics written by Christians. And I think there's a power to that, to not just stay in our lane and to keep beating that one drum, but to then say, okay, this is there. How does this then affect the rest of the flow of the story? And I thought you did it without drawing attention to it. Your discussion of the gods, your discussion of the way that we interact in our community. And so I can totally understand Kaleb. And I think anyone who has that passion for DCW is going to look for the footnote. But at the moment when I was reading it, I was like, okay, I see what's going on here.
Yep. Yeah. And it's not that, well, first of all, it's not that kind of book. I didn't want anybody to be burdened by the footnotes, but also that's what I do in my preaching. I emphasize the story of Scripture, and I will unapologetically explain the story of the Scripture. And so it's weird because if you have this like thing about like fallen angels, the sons of God, and you just tell it within the flow of the story, you get a better story. And story is actually what convinces people of things. I've talked about this a lot on my podcast. I think it came up a couple times in the book that, especially chapter 9, story is so important to the way that worldview and belief systems are shaped. And so, sure, somebody might be reading along and go, "Oh my goodness, sons of," what does that mean, or whatever. But then as they keep reading, what's going to happen is they're going to go, oh, but if we don't interpret it that way, then none of this story makes sense. And so I like to not break from the narrative and really just tell the story, and then see how the story leads to fruit. So yeah, I mean, it's an absolutely great feedback, and I guess all I can say is that's why I didn't put it in there.
Yeah. No, and that makes perfect sense. And I love what you guys are saying about, the scriptures. It reminds me of one thing that Heiser would say is that people don't have to be protected from their Bibles. That,
yes.
God doesn't need you to defend him. Just let God's word speak for itself in its own context. John, I know you mentioned John Walton. It's something that he would talk about, which is, to get into the story of the scriptures, you have to kind of get out of the cultural river that you're currently in your postmodern context. And you've got to kind of, be like, hey, what would it be like to live in that cultural river, in that context, in that time, in that language, in that period of history? And, when we do that and we really engage the biblical story with people, it's really beautiful. It's a lot of fun.
I think so. And I think you nailed that in your review also. Like I got the idea, like, first of all, I know who you are from talking online and things, but I was like, man, this guy understands, and then he also understands that this is a conversation, this is a question. He's dealing with not just how do modern day people read this, but how do I communicate this to people? And if both of you guys are in ministry, I know that this is a big part of our preparation. It isn't just, okay, I now understand the topic. Now, how do I bring this to people, whether that's through the writing of music or the performing of a song, like or the writing of a book? We have to be creative and purposeful in our bringing the information to the people. And so even little things like Kaleb, like I loved the design of your page. Like it was aesthetically pleasing. Just looking at it, I was like, I want to read this. Like things like that, they may seem small, but it's all part of this communicating something lovely and taking a conversation a step farther. So I think both of you guys did a great job with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Anthony, another thing that I was really curious about was, there were a couple of times where you had some really interesting data. Early on, you had on one of the, I think it was page 29, you had a piece of research that said that the data suggests up to 40% of Christians question the necessity of the Old Testament for someone to believe the gospel of Jesus. And as a youth pastor, I'm on high school campuses every week. I'm like, I love that data. That helps me a lot. So I guess the thing that I was wondering is, what would you say for someone who's like looking for ways to find some of that data and research? Maybe someone who like doesn't have the tools, like if someone isn't maybe in the kind of positions that maybe we're in, where we're exposed to this data a lot, or knows where to go to find it. Like, what would you say to equip readers to kind of equip themselves with some of that information?
Yeah, I believe that specific piece of data on 29, the data suggests that 40% of Christians question the necessity of the Old Testament. I believe that specific piece of data came from State of Theology survey. I think it was the 2022 or 23 version, not the 24 that's currently published. And yeah, you're right. But then it was complicated because it was inspired by a study I was reading from Pew Research, and so it is all of this stuff is readily available. But you're right to say, what do you say to somebody who doesn't know where to go to find it? Because it is a lot of like thinking through like how else might they be talking about this? Because I didn't go look at the raw data to pull that statistic. It was sort of a meandering pathway of reading various analysis that had been done using either Pew Research data or Lifeway research data, or reading through the data on State of Theology. And so the reason that one actually didn't have a citation was because there was not like one or two places I could point to say, here's where this data came from by the time that it got to this form. And so we actually talked about pulling it out because it wasn't citable. I would have needed to write a paper referencing the studies to have something to cite. And so we talked about pulling it out, but felt it was an important point to keep in.
Yeah.
It's really, sometimes it just comes down to, man, I've written a number of books, but I've only published 2. And so, when I used to write just for writing's sake, these are things that you don't think through, like when you get to the publishing process, like where does, how is this going to come across, and what do you keep in and what do you cut out? And it was just another one of those really hard decisions. But yeah, I think what I would say is, if you're interested in that kind of data, start following those 3 sources. Start following, Pew Research's blog on their website. Start doing the same for Lifeway Research, and then follow. It's not really something to follow, but like familiarize yourself with the State of Theology survey. Those are all, broadly Christian resources. I think State of Theology, more Protestant, and Lifeway, obviously, a more evangelical bent. But yeah.
Okay.
I think that
now. Okay, so just go ahead, John.
I was just gonna say, like, that feels that number, like when I think about like how hard I have to work sometimes to get people to care about the Old Testament or to be at all interested in the symbolism and that kind of a thing. And so like just like I can't cite a number, but I would say like just from my personal experience, that feels about right. I have a lot of time invested in trying to get people to say, hey, you should read your Old Testament. It will help you understand Jesus.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Anthony, you mentioned the word Protestant. Speaking of that, I had just another question. You've got a chapter on gospel family, and for everybody listening right now, it is so good. It might be my favorite section of the entire book because I just think that family is just such an indispensable element of the story of the scriptures. And Anthony, I love your imagery of, that being one of the big spokes in the wheel that is the gospel. And for all of us, we're ministering in a Western Protestant context, there's a moment where you kind of talk about Mary and just kind of like as incarnational mother, just conceptually. And you talk about Mary's virginity as an ecclesiological concept and in that chapter. And I'm not asking about perpetual virginity. We would need 3 podcasts for that. That's a whole long thing. But for those who, I was thinking for those who are like these dyed-in-the-wool, born and raised Protestants who would read that and say, man, that kind of stuff, that's just Marian dogma. And they're leery of kind of any Orthodox or Catholic theology as sources for where we're at today. Kind of where would you point them to, as a pastor and as a scholar?
I would just honestly, I would just remind people, and I think I say there in the chapter that I'm unapologetically Protestant. Like, I would just remind people that we share 80%, and this is just me throwing out a number, but we share probably 80% of our theology with the Catholic Church and with the Orthodox Church. Like, we agree on far more than we disagree on. And so if that's true, and if all theology has developed across, now 2 millennium of time, then I don't think we need to be afraid of anything that like smells like Catholicism, right? Because we aren't Protestants without Catholicism, honestly. And if you really if you go read Luther's theses, the list of things that he wanted changed in the Catholic Church is actually pretty short. It's actually a pretty short list. And so I would just remind people that like we don't need to be as afraid of things just because they sound Catholic. Now, this is a good example of one of the places where some higher level thinking gets snuck into the book. But like, I wanted people to see that this imagery is present in the scriptures where the church, the church's responsibility is to, and it's Mary imagery, but the church is, as Mary birthed the Son of God, the church births sons of God. Like, I wanted them to see that, like, the way that patterning, Jim Hamilton calls this typology, and if you follow, like, I don't know, somebody like Jonathan Pajot, who's Eastern Orthodox, he'll call it symbology. But they're fairly similar ideas, the way that they unpack them. Jim Hamilton has a far more symbolic, in my opinion, view of typology than most people think of when they think of type and antitype. But what it boils down to at the end of the day is the ability to recognize patterns that exist across Scripture. And that's what I did in every chapter of the book is I kind of started in Genesis and ended in Revelation. Not always, not precisely, but traced the narrative from the Old through the Old Testament, through the Second Temple literature, through the New Testament. Here and there, a shout out to the church fathers, trying to show the way that the ideas progress and exist as theological threads throughout the Scripture. And this is just one of those ones where when you do take a symbolic look at the Scriptures, or a typological look at the Scriptures, you're going to see ideas about Mary pop up in other places. And we just need to be okay with that and say that we don't need to believe in the perpetual virginity of Mary if you don't believe that. Honestly, I don't think it's a terribly dangerous doctrine as long as you don't hang your hat on it as like an essential dogma, you know? Like, I don't even see the perpetual virginity of Mary as something worth arguing about. That's me, though. I have a little bit of an ecumenical bent to me. Not broadly ecumenical, but, I have a little bit of that bent. And I want to learn from everybody what's right, what's not right. So anyway, that's why it's in there, is I wanted people to see it and to I did want to kind of like get some people on edge. But I also wanted them to go, okay, but I can accept this part of the paradigm.
I think that's a good answer. I had my mic turned down there for a minute. Sorry. We are at the 40-minute mark here, and we try to shoot for around an hour. And so I want to make sure that we're hitting a lot of the other content here. So Kaleb, you said there were a few statements that could have used some more qualifying. What do you want him to qualify? What were some parts that you thought you wanted him to dig in more that just left you wondering for extra?
Yeah, sure. So, all right. So this first one is really interesting to me regarding Satan, because I'm actually writing a little bit about Satan, Kingdom of Darkness right now. So Anthony, we'll have to sidebar later since you're writing about that. But at one point in the book, you wrote about Satan that the pinnacle event in his turning to the dark side, kind of the moment of no return, is when he possesses Judas in Luke 22. And I was just thinking, first impression reading it, that I couldn't tell if your suggestion there is that, like, the question people ask, could Satan have repented? Would he have repented prior to Judas's betrayal? So I finagled a whole review and twisted John's arm to getting you on the podcast. So I've got you here now. I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm just curious to hear you elaborate on that a little bit about what you think.
Oh, man. So this is an interesting question to turn to if we only have 20 minutes left. I just want to say that was an interesting decision.
We'll go as long as we need to go.
Okay. I'm fine with that. So the passages you're referring to, Luke 22:3, Satan entered Judas, John 13:27, Judas ate the piece of bread and Satan entered him. And so, like, these are where we sort of get this idea that Judas was, I don't love this terminology, but he was possessed, or you could say demonized, by Satan himself. And I've gotten this question before when I've talked about this in other contexts. And but no matter how you parse it, let's frame it this way. There was a time when Satan was not damned. Okay. Now, some people want to put Satan's fall before creation, but Satan existed as not damned at some point, right? So there has to have been, no matter where you do that, I'm going to put his full-on fall at the incarnation. But other people aren't going to do that. So, and that's just okay if they read Milton that way. So there was a time when he wasn't damned, followed by a time when he was damned. I was wondering if anybody was going to catch that I said that. So,
yeah, no, we're with
and certainly there are prophecies in the Old Testament where you get ideas about his condemnation. So you're going to see, we're going to see these ideas about his condemnation. But do these point backward or forward is the question. If you're reading, say, Ezekiel, and do they point upwards to the fall of Satan, or do they point backwards to the fall of Satan? And so for purposes of this question, it almost doesn't really matter where you put it, as long as you understand that there's a time when Satan wasn't damned and he was damned. The biblical theology, though, when we talk about the difference between biblical theology and systematic theology, is that biblical theology is an unfolding narrative. It has to do with theological inferences that we make based on the text as the text unfolds throughout sort of the biblical storyline. Questions like this actually flow from a systematic perspective where we want to sort of know dogmatically, as we reflect on everything that the scriptures teach, what is blank about blank topic. And so this is sort of more of a systematic question, where the book is approaching it, and the statement that was read is more of a biblical theology question. And so you look to, like, for example, Revelation 12, that details the fall of Satan at the incarnation events when he was cast out of heaven and he fell to earth. And this is a statement of what we would call, based on what we would call a three-tiered cosmology, that you have heaven, earth, and under the earth. And you can Google three-tiered cosmology and find lots of great images to help explain that for any readers who need to do that. But we're not thinking about the universe the way that we think about it scientifically and materialistically today, but in a spiritual heaven, earth, under the earth paradigm. And so Satan is, in a sense, in Revelation 12, he's being demoted. He's being cast out of heaven. But it's very clear in the text that he is now on earth. And it sort of answers this question for us, by the way, of if Satan has been cast out, how come Satan is still active on the earth? Well, it's because that's where he's been cast out to. He's here, right? And so but then in the storyline, that's Revelation 12, sort of a picture of where we are in, redemptive history now. But then in Revelation 20:10, he's vanquished to the lake of fire. Sort of, you could say, an eternal condemnation, whether that's an eternally conscious or not. For Satan, that's a different question, or for anybody else, I suppose, for that matter. But Satan is not under the earth, you could say, until Revelation 20, after Christ returns. And so there's two ways to look at this. If we look at it from God's perspective, which is kind of systematics, he knows that Satan will betray him. And so if we ask, can Satan do anything other than what God has seen? The answer is no, right? But when we do biblical theology and we're looking through the narrative and within time, we're analyzing the narrative, which happens within this flow of time and reality that we understand and we experience on a moment-by-moment basis. So from a biblical theology perspective, could Satan have just not indwelt Judas? From the biblical theological perspective, the answer is yes. And it appears within the narrative that divine beings share the same free will as humans, however we want to define free will or free agency or anything like that. And so I realize I'm not quite to the question yet, because all I've so far argued for is that from a biblical theological perspective, could Satan not have indwelled Judas? The answer is yes. But then that makes us think about things that Satan has done in his rebellion before that. Okay? So up until that point, we definitely know, and that was the statement that I made, that at that point, that's when sort of it's been secured. It's the pinnacle event and it's turning to the dark side, so to speak. Which is a funny thing to say, and I recognize that's a funny thing to say because he is the dark side, right? He's sort of the caricature of the dark side, and I realize that we're talking about him turning to the dark side. But anyway, so your question is basically, if Satan didn't indwell Judas, could he escape the lake of fire? No, I'm sorry, that's not your question. Your question is, if he hadn't indwelt Judas, would he have been considered repentant and thus escaped the lake of fire? So some things to consider. If we go back to Genesis 6, what we already, briefly mentioned earlier, the angels who sinned in Genesis 6, we're told in Jude 6, are chained in gloomy darkness. They're already judged and awaiting the lake of fire. Satan isn't there, though. And First Enoch tells us that before the angels of Genesis 6 are chained up, they're cast out of heaven and condemned to the earth, not unlike Satan in Revelation 12. So that's actually what happens is in First Enoch is they're not actually sent to like chained in gloomy darkness awaiting the lake of fire yet. They're on earth. It's a three-tiered cosmology thing. But Jude sees them in gloomy darkness. So what's the disconnect when especially Jude is quoting First Enoch in Jude 6? Well, as you develop that, and I realize, I'll remind the Two Trees listeners, First Enoch is not canon in any majority world church. And so we recognize that. But that doesn't mean that it's not God inspired in any way. And even if it's not God inspired, it doesn't mean it's not true. And so we don't really need to settle the inspiration argument to know that people in Jesus' day were reading this and in the disciples' day were reading it. So we read it and we find out that there's more to the narrative, that after they had been content to the earth, now the sons of God, they go, or they're called the Watchers in Enoch. Now they go and they're teaching secret knowledge to humans that they were not supposed to know. And so this begins to unfold. And in the Satan narrative, he's cast out of heaven to the earth, just like the angels were, but not chained in gloomy darkness like the angels were in the Enoch narrative. And that's why he's still here. So that he, in Revelation 20, now, verses 11 through 15, I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on the throne, and if anyone's name was not written in the book of life, he was cast into the lake of fire. So it's sort of this narrative of everything that is not loyal to God gets cast into the lake of fire, including the devil himself. And so the question then becomes, based on Revelation 20, can we believe that Satan's name would ever have been written in the book of life? Okay, that's sort of a way to say that. Even if he didn't possess Judas. So didn't he still sin? And this is and so we know that he will be judged and cast into the lake of fire, even if he weren't prophesied back in the top in verse 10. But the question about repentance, could he have escaped the lake of fire if he repented, is no from a systematic standpoint, because God knew and prophesied that he wouldn't. But we should read it as maybe so from a biblical theology perspective as we consider the unfolding of the narrative. And for this reason, again, I don't that was a lot of background, and I apologize.
No, it's
but
great.
What we call angelic redemption, which is like in Protestant, especially evangelical circles, is like heresy. It's like don't even bring that up. I think the idea of angelic redemption is wrong. I don't actually think it's right. But there are no less than a handful of church fathers who argued for angelic redemption. And forgive me, I didn't know I was going to say that, so I didn't prepare a citation for that. But it's out there. There were a few church fathers who
he's
argued
gun shy now. We've got him on his references.
And it's because of
Goodness.
It's because it'd actually be great to throw into the conversation right now, but I don't even think it's that important, honestly. But if you're tracing the biblical theology, you want to believe that even Satan can decide to do the right thing. And that's what's happening as you read the story. And you're like, gosh, I can't believe that Satan, who's been prophesied that he's going to be, he's going to be destroyed, he's just going to dig his heels in more, and it's just worse and worse and worse until Jesus says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. But we are supposed to read it as though he could be redeemed from a biblical theology standpoint, and yet say from a systematic standpoint, no, absolutely not. And some people don't like that I talk about biblical and systematic theology that way. That I don't like labels a whole lot, but I'm more reformed in my systematic theology and more Arminian in my biblical theology. And the reason for that is because Reformed theology is a systematic theology, or at least if we're going to say Reformed soteriology, is a systematic theology. And Arminian theology is actually a biblical theology. All of the arguments for free will and free agency, and they're all coming from the narrative flow of the text. And, so I don't personally, I'm not a Molinist. I'm not trying to synthesize the two. if I'm doing biblical theology, I'm going to sound like an Arminian, and if I'm doing systematic theology, I'm going to sound like a Calvinist, and I'm totally okay with that. But people don't like that. They're like, you can't be both. That doesn't make any sense. But I want you to understand. I'm going to give you an illustration here. This is how we watch movies. We watch movies this way, and my wife and I will sit and we're watching a movie, and she's always trying to figure out what's going to happen in the end. And she knows she's not supposed to tell me, but sometimes she does. She goes, "Oh, it's gonna be that guy that killed them or whatever," right? She's always looking for she's the systematics person, She's always trying to figure out from if she could step outside the movie, how do the pieces fit together, and so that she knows what's going to happen in the end. And that's the fun of watching a movie for her. For me, my brain is doing that too, but I took a film and lit class in college and decided that I didn't want to ruin movies for myself anymore. So I just fight it the whole movie. And I just want to see what the next scene unfolds. And so I'm doing biblical theology when I watch a movie, and she's doing systematic theology when she watches a movie. But we're watching the same movie. And that's what I want people to understand with that sort of thing. We can say, could Satan repent? And on one hand, you go, yeah, from a biblical theology standpoint, and from the other, absolutely he cannot because it's been prophesied, it's been sealed, it's signed and sealed from a systematic standpoint, but that's okay. We're both reading the same Bible, we're still watching the same narrative. So anyway, I told you that was a long explanation.
No, I've not really thought about it that way before. You've intrigued my mind. I'm going to chew on this for the rest of the day. Probably longer than the rest of the day. We're at the 1 hour point here, guys. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to ask you a question. Would you guys mind if I'm on the spot here, but I would really love to get some more back and forths here. How would you guys feel about a joint article where Kaleb asks a question and we get a response from Anthony in the next couple weeks? I mean, it's only Holy Week, so you don't have much to do over the next couple months. But could we move the format from vocal into that of like a dear friend screw tape letter, kind of a back and forth kind of a thing?
Yeah,
I think that'd be a blast. Yeah, we could do that.
All right, because
Definitely.
we have more content, more questions that Kaleb has, and I want Anthony to have the opportunity to do this. So look for this online. If I decide or they decide, John, why are you giving me work? I don't want to do that. I may just have them come back on the episode and wrap it up that way. But guys, where can people go to hear you guys speak, hear you guys play, encounter your writings? Where would you direct people to get more involved in your ministries?
You want to go first, Kaleb?
Sure. So, man, you can find me on Substack. I have a page there where I write called Highways to Zion. I write anything from theology, worship, issues facing the modern church. I love dabbling in a little bit of ancient mythology and ancient history and languages and little poetry here and there. I'm on social media as well. You can find me there. Would love to connect with any of you guys. And then one other really cool thing I was blessed to be a part of, I helped produce a prayer album that our church recorded for our people. That's where cool. Our heart was really just, to facilitate sacred moments. And nice. So it's on Apple, Spotify. It's called Abide, one word, all caps, and it's by Canyon Hills Music. And there are just some really beautiful pieces there for people to put on when they're in the car, having devotion time, whatever it is. So you can find that anywhere.
That's awesome. I'm going to check that out, Kaleb. So for me, sort of my hub is anthonydelgado.net. And I would just recommend anybody who wants to sort of just broadly see what I'm doing to sign up for the mailing list that's there, because that's the funnel. Everything I do, if it's, when this podcast goes live, it's going to show up on my mailing list. And if I write an article, and I'm not consistent with anything I do, so sometimes I'll write 3 articles in a week and then not write one for 3 months, or I might release 2 podcast episodes on the Biblical Reenchantment podcast and then not. So anyway, I just recommend anthonydelgado.net and grab the sign up for the mailing list. It's not an annoying one. I'm not trying to sell anything. It's just a digest. And then if you're interested in the Gospel is Bigger Than You Think, or my former book, The Watchers and the Holy Ones, those are both available on Amazon. And yep, Caleb's got his copy handy. I got mine here. See, yeah. Where's yours, John? Anyway, so
it's on my phone.
yeah, okay, that's right. So yeah, that's where you can find me. I've never said this on a podcast before, but it's become a thing recently. That if you want to follow my sermons, which are thoroughly divine counsel worldview saturated, you can go to palmdale.church, and that's the church I pastor. It's very creatively titled Palmdale Church, and it's in Palmdale, California. And so yeah, you can follow sermons and stuff there as well. So I did have a couple of notes about The Gospel is Bigger Than You Think. We are finally in process of translating it to Spanish. So as long as there's no roadblocks with that, I'm hoping here in a few months we'll have Spanish version out. And we've also commissioned an illustrator to work with us on a kids version of The Gospel is Bigger Than You Think. Immediately after reading the book, a number of people have said, what does this mean for kids ministry? And, brought me material, curriculum samples from things that their churches are using, and said, I can't use this now because now I see the gospel not as less than what the kids ministry stuff says, but as bigger. And so a kid's version of the book is the first step on that. And then we'll, so hopefully, I'm hoping both of those things can be out by year end, the Spanish and the kids version. So those are both in process.
That would be awesome. Guys, I can't thank you enough for coming together and just continuing the conversation. I really think that the church throws a lot of rocks at one another, and I think it's very meaningful for us to sit down and just talk and to listen to one another. And so whether you buy everything or you're just thinking about that thought, I hope you had several pullaways and you're like, hey, that was fun. I enjoyed thinking about that. I think that's the fun of family and being together and talking this way. So brothers, thank you so much for coming on to the Two Trees and just taking your conversations into a public forum where more people can benefit from that back and forth. So guys, thank you very much. And to my listeners, thank you for listening to the Two Trees podcast. Please remember that the Lord your God is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, King of kings, mighty and awesome.